Well, we're delighted to be here. As you can see, Jim Spaeth, moderator, didn't make it in, unfortunately, so we are going to make this conversational. And I guess I'll kick it off.
Absolutely.
Does that sound good, Carlos?
Hello, everybody.
So I founded Analytic Partners almost 20 years ago now, when Facebook didn't even exist. And we turn data into expertise. We do attribution. How many folks here have experience with attribution? How many folks have great successes with attribution? Not so many hands. That's the challenge with attribution. But we'll talk about that some more. Just wanted to introduce myself. I have a great amount of experience in turning data into expertise for our clients and attacking the challenge of how do we get to the right person with the right message at the right time, which I think is the promise of attribution. I'll let Carlos introduce himself.
So I'm going to turn this on now because otherwise it gets feedback. Well, I'm Carlos Fonseca. The accent is from Colombia. I was born in Colombia and I started my career in Procter & Gamble a long time ago as a brand manager. I'm originally an engineer, but what I learned, to your point, is that to actually do effective advertising, you need to have the data, you need to have the analytics, but actually you need to understand how individuals behave, and that connects with the Forrester presentation about the importance of creativity. So I also studied anthropology to do that. And I've been working for more than 20 years in trying to kind of like put the two things together, analytics and actually understanding people's feelings and behaviors. Right now I'm at MetLife, but before that I was at MasterCard and at Citibank working around the world. And what we're trying right now to do in the insurance space is actually evolve this industry faster. Because lots of the things that are happening in insurance happen already in lots of the financial services and happened a while ago in FMCG. So the question is, how can we use all the data that we have in the insurance space to actually make our products and our messages more relevant to consumers around the world? And how can we use data to actually understand the needs of those consumers and talk in a way that they react to it? And it's high time to do that. So kind of attribution is one of the tools, but it's important just to keep the big picture of what the industry mission and vision should be and how you combine analytical elements with kind of like more sociological elements and macro trends to actually kind of like fulfill a mission that is greater than just making money.
Yeah, I completely agree. Understanding that consumer dynamic and context is critical with any analytics, and connecting the dots. What I thought we could do is start with just the definition of attribution, since we get many requests from clients, even recently with, I'd like an MTA study done. And it's always for a different purpose, different reason, or different objective. So attribution is really all about connecting events, or you can think of advertising touch points, with an outcome. That outcome could be a visit to a website. That outcome could be a conversion. It could be a sale. It could be a walk into a store. And having that connection for those advertisements and the key outcome is really what attribution is doing. Now, there's attributing that this person went to this website to purchase a product, and they came through, let's say, Google search, and there's distinguishing between that person used Google search to get to that website, but they knew they were going to buy, or the search ad incrementally drove them to the website. In other words, they would not have bought had they not seen the search ad. And distinguishing between an incremental impact and just a steering to a website or you would have bought it anyway is actually one of the key differentiators between doing attribution well and just looking at, for example, last click, which was the first form of attribution. Last click was simply what was the last touch before a conversion event or before a key outcome, and that was given the credit. And what does that do? Well, if most people search for a website and they click on the sponsored ad, that sponsored ad is going to get credit for that website purchase via last click. But it's very possible that it was a TV ad, it was a YouTube ad, it was a sponsorship, or any other many, many different touch points that drove that ad. But that's really the basis of attribution.
And back to basic, what Nancy describing here is actually trying to understand what is the consumer decision journey, right? And that is a principle that you can apply across different industries. Now, the detail is obviously that in different industries, there are different touch points, right? I think that all of us are aware that consumers now are multi-touch, multi-screen, right? Not necessarily they are going to be only digital. So the question is how much you can create a conversation between a supplier and a client, right? For us to work together to actually map that journey, to be able to map that journey, understand what is the availability of the information that we need to actually kind of like feed the model. Being able to map that journey to understand that in many cases, the information that we need is not within the control of the company. In the case of insurance, for example, we have a lot of agencies that are independent. We have a lot of channels of distribution. This happens also in retail and in financial services that have that data and gather that data as part of their proprietary competitive advantage. So what are we going to do to get that data? How are we going to generate coordination along the value chain to do that? That is a very important part of what we do.
Yeah, I think data is absolutely one of the critical challenges. I think when attribution came on the marketplace many years ago, the thought was the data is going to get better. Let's get these models in place. Let's get this big data, harness it, create a framework, and it's going to get better. It's going to be, I have this great promise. I'm going to be able to deliver the right message to the right person, that hyper-targeting that Colin was talking about, at the right time. But what's happened is the data hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. We have walled gardens, Facebook and Google. We have LiveRamp is doing well because they fill some of that gap, but there's still, you have ad blocking, you have fraud. We are in an age of disruption, so if you build a technology today and blockchain does what Forrester predicts, you're going to need to rebuild that or reframe it next year or the year after. So it's such a dynamically changing place. You really need to have an eye in terms of attribution for what you're looking to achieve. What is it that you're looking to as your goal? And it may be attribution, it may be other tools that can get you to that goal. But then what is your journey there? And don't just view it as I can just buy this technology, plug it in, get the data that connects to it, and it's going to work. It just doesn't work that way. I liken it to exercise equipment like a Bowflex or a shake weight or an ab roller. People have this great vision of six-pack abs when they buy these, and it's really about discipline, it's about effort, and it's going to take time and energy. It's not a plug and play. If you want to have a strong physical physique, same thing if you want to turn your data into expertise and ensure that you can deliver your advertising effectively and efficiently.
I will add to what Nancy is saying. I mean, she's talking about the idea of availability and quality. The third element that I will mention is the idea of connectivity. Yes. Even if the information is available and the quality is good, legacy systems exist in most of the industries and most of the companies. So the question is, do you have the connectivity? Do you have APIs that allows you to integrate that information? Because otherwise it's very hard to make sense of the models. Now, where that information resides, we're not talking only about kind of like media investment. Lots of the information that makes sense stays in your operational systems, on your CRM, on kind of like your call centers, right? Very kind of like powerful attribution model is the one that is able to integrate those factors and actually understand who is this customer that I'm talking to, right? In many cases, we have very long cycles of purchase, right? In the case of financial services and insurance, that is the case. So the challenge is bigger because it's difficult to actually attribute a specific effect after a very long cycle of purchase. In many cases, the objective in financial services is not only to sell a new product, but actually to retain a customer. Because in many cases, it's more important actually to have a second year, third year, fourth year repurchase, because this is the economics of the business. So the question is, how can we use attribution models and CRM to actually be smarter about who I'm dealing with, what is the type of advertising that I serve to them, but what is the next best action that I do to cross-sell or to retain that customer? So we're not talking only about an advertising and marketing challenge, but it's actually a true cross-functional challenge. In our work, I believe that we interact not only with advertisers and with advertising agencies, but with people in operations and technology and with people in customer service that actually need to be on board about kind of like the idea that marketing return of investment or return on investment in general, it's kind of like a cross-functional challenge as opposed to something that we only do in marketing or an agency helps us to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that it is cross-functional. It is, I would paint the picture of it is a journey, and if you're looking to attribution as a solution, you really need to make sure that you define the problem very, very well, because really articulating what you're looking to achieve, especially if you are in an industry with a much longer purchase decision, then you may only look at, the upper funnel, so to speak. How many people are from automotive? How many people are visiting the website? How many people are looking at the different models? How many people are requesting a test drive? Those are multiple different KPIs that your advertising may impact, but there's a lot of energy, time, and work that needs to go into really defining what you're trying to move in terms of the advertising, where is that KPI that you're looking to have an impact on, and then how does the data line up to being able to achieve that? And I think a lot of companies walk into it with the vision to create that tech stack or that data lake or data hub that's going to connect everything and answer all their possible questions. And then you can just fire questions at it and it'll answer you, like the vision of IBM Watson. It doesn't work that way, and it's going to be a multi-year journey, and you're going to be disappointed with what you wind up with. A much smarter way to move forward is really defining where can you make the biggest impact, where do you feel like you're spending a lot of dollars as a marketer, so that you can optimize that, and what are those KPIs you're looking to move, and if we can start there and start with a framework and build, that's going to be a better way forward.
That is very true, and that reflects kind of like a lot of practical wisdom, right? People originally tried to build a huge pyramid, perfect, complete, right? And even when people talk about a data lake, now, I think that a better metaphor is talk about a data river, right? Because the information is flowing so fast, right? That your lake gets stale. Everything it's pointless, right? So the question is, what is your high value use case? How can you create and kind of identify a small set of information and a problem with enough value for you to generate credibility inside the company? That's one thing. The other thing is, how you kind of like create a flexible design and a flexible kind of like data management approach, so you allow different vendors to use different tools. Not necessarily you're going to use with a single vendor or a single group is going to do everything. So the question is, what are you going to put in that kind of like lake or river that is going to allow different people to tackle different problems? That is very important, right? And the thing that is obviously kind of like my obsession, because I don't do only this, but kind of like the whole idea of end-to-end optimization, is what are the key elements to define a single view of the customer across the organization, right? And that has implications not only on the information that customer gives you, but how you manage that information in the face of GDPR and other things, right? What are you going to do to actually create flexibility to understand those customers as they change through life? And this is something specifically important for insurance, because we want to actually evolve with customers.
Right, and ensuring that you get them the right offer, and that's where I think the prediction on a move back to creative from Forrester, away from that hyper targeting, but really focusing on the messaging and the context, is one that we're seeing as well. We've actually measured the impact of messaging versus getting to that right person versus getting to that person at the right time. And really the biggest opportunity in terms of impact is that creative messaging. And we have so many different ways we can speak to consumers today that that messaging needs to take many different forms. But I think there has been more of a focus on the targeting and less of a focus on the messaging, and think of the power of combining those two could be huge. And again, that's the key thing, is to define the goal of what you're trying to measure with attribution. If you're looking to optimize your creative, if you're looking to have dynamic creative relative to key customer segments and understand when is the best time, that's a great goal to articulate so that you can then find the right solution and the right data. Should we talk about some of the data challenges? And we can take questions as well, because I'd love to make sure that we are...
Yes, one last thing about what
sure.
you're saying, I think that is key, which is, I mean, definitely it's a combination between kind of like hyper-targeting or targeting and excellent creative. And I think that there is a synergy there, because, I mean, the more and more information that you have, if you use it correctly, you can gain additional insights about customers. If you look, for example, at how the segmentation models have evolved over time, right? Years ago, it was mostly a demographic segmentation, and the reality is that that's kind of like the surface. Right now, you can understand consumers from a behavioral point of view. Even more, many consumers are willing to give you information that allows better understanding if there is value in that kind of information exchange. So you have better targeting based on where we are, what they do, but also how they think and how they decide, right? So that is the basic for excellent creative. Actually serving messages that reflect what are the cognitive styles and the moments in life of those consumers, right? Obviously, you use targeting to actually serve that creative that resonates at the right moment. So there's a huge synergy there, right? So if you look at the way that marketing organizations were designed in the past, I mean, the traditional marketing organization had a huge emphasis in brand strategy and kind of like a brand equity, right? And that was good. Now, I think that we hyper-corrected into performance marketing. And what we're trying to get, and this is kind of like the message that I think that we want to leave with you, is actually there has to be a balance, right? You cannot do only performance marketing if you don't have a true north of what your value proposition is, what your brand is going to be. At the end of the day, in this day and age, as the information explodes, I honestly believe that brands are going to be even more important, because brands are cues for people to decide. Now you have a hyper-stimulation in terms of the information that you get, right? Imagine the role of the brands, right? Now you have a shorter news cycle, for example. I was looking at a presentation that shows about how fast the Twitter news cycle is, right? What is the power of being a brand that means something? What is the power of kind of like being a shortcut for things that mean to people, right? And this is what we're trying to do with attribution modeling and other techniques. Being able to understand when and where we can actually create that maximum impact and be efficient in our communication with consumers and the return of our investment.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that entirely. The branding piece of advertising and how we drive resonance with our customers is not really the goal of attribution today. Attribution typically has a 1 month at maximum 3 month look back window. So, think about it. Whatever KPI you are looking, that outcome that you are looking at, whether it be a website visit, a conversion, a purchase, you're going to look back and see what ads where you can connect this person was served. And if it's a long purchase cycle with a long decision cycle, you're going to miss out on really that impact. You're also not necessarily accounting for branding advertising and how that kind of impacts the gut, as Colin says. How does that impact that feeling about the brand? And you know what? That's going to make the advertising, the digital advertising, more effective. Brands that have stronger equity in the marketplace have stronger ROIs. We've measured it. It's absolutely true. But that's really why you need to balance any attribution, which is a short-sighted view, even shorter-sighted than marketing mix modeling, which we didn't even talk about. But it's a very short-sighted view with branding. And if you think about optimizing based on that very short-sighted view, it really should be complemented with a long-term view or a branding view as well.
Yes, And I think that brings the kind of like the idea of combining attribution with A/B experimentation, for example, right? Because I mean, it's similar to how you train kind of like your models. Actually, you can have specific cases that isolate certain effects, and you can learn from that, and you can redefine your parameters or kind of adjust the model based on that specific experience. So what is interesting is as we talk about all these, what actually we are discovering, and probably you're more aware than that, is that the set of skills that you need to be a model marketeer, right, encompass the traditional kind of like brand marketing, brand equity, with a lot of kind of like, I'm an engineer, I'm biased, right? A taste for experimentation, a taste for actually modeling and try to make sense of the world, kind of like not in ones and zeros, but to some extent in kind of like a cause and effect, right? It's kind of like physics more than mathematics and physics, I would say.
Yeah, economics.
You have a PhD in economics, so yeah, good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, skill building today, we look for folks that are not just going to understand the branding and the marketing space and the science, but really can bring to life what do the insights mean in terms of action? Because what we're doing with all of these analytics tools and everything you're seeing today, it's all about enablement, moving towards more data-driven decisioning, and turning data into expertise so that you can get closer with your customers and drive competitive advantage. I think that's the goal, that's the journey. In order to do that, there's not going to be one technique. There's going to be a multitude of techniques, and they're all good for really in different use cases for different purposes. But you mentioned experimenting, which is a great use case for validation. So you get a great learning out of an attribution study or a mix study, and you share it with your management, and they're not bought in. Well, what's the next best thing to do? We test it. And that's the real power of connecting the dots across these analytic tools and solutions. That's really where you make a difference and you move to more data-driven decisioning.
Nancy, probably you're talking on a point that is very important, probably relevant for you as young professionals, which is, I mean, being in this space is one of the hottest professions, right? I mean, you'll see how many people are recruiting right now, but the question is what skills does it take to get recruited to be successful? And this is idea of being kind of like almost like a Leonardo da Vinci, right? I mean, the people that I try to recruit are people that are able to understand kind of math, but at the same time tell a story in simple terms, right? Make sense of what does it mean for the business, right? Being able to relate to this consumer decision journey and this kind of like a value chain that a specific industry has, and put this into kind of like a model, right? So the question is, you're young, right? You probably learn faster than us, right? Yeah. So the question is, how are you going to keep that balance, right? And keeping that ability to make sense of the world using math and economics, but actually translating that in a simple language that a salesperson can understand, that a CEO that is 5 years from retirement can understand without yawning on or not giving you money, right? That is the real challenge, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Shall we take some questions from the audience?
Hi. So it's kind of a two-part question, and it's mostly directed towards you, Nancy. So have you worked with any media companies or publishers in the space? That's A. And B, if so, what was your biggest challenge as far as like data connectivity goes, as far as customer touch points for those companies?
I think that there's always a challenge, and I couldn't distill it down to one, unfortunately. Some is the data's just not set up to connect. Some is GDPR has created a challenge. We worked with one company who had a database of folks, and it was 7 million strong, and they went GDPR compliant, and it went down to 1 million. And that's a big difference, and it creates a whole different dynamic for, now you need to acquire folks to come in. But there's so many. If you have more specific question on that, I'd be happy to answer. But I would say, while data may be highlighted as one of the biggest challenges, it's not the number one in terms of driving the adoption of analytics. It's really organizational buy-in. And this is where I think Carlos made a great point, and all of you come into play. How do we distill down these very complex, the reason why folks call these black boxes is really not because they're a black box all the time. Sometimes they might be, but they're not necessarily a black box. They're just hard to understand. It's very complex.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of anecdotes. One is organizational readiness. I mean, sometimes you get the empowerment to implement one of these models at the company, but really the organization is not ready, people don't understand what it takes. So practical advice is definitely do kind of like a readiness assessment. I mean, make sure that with whomever vendor you choose, you actually go over the minimum things that you need and learn to say no sometimes, or learn to say later, right?
An executive sponsor.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Yes, correct. And the second piece is actually organizational flexibility, which is different. You might have great results from your mixed model of your attribution. Okay, you need to rebalance from this channel to this other, and the answer is, okay, you already negotiated the media budget for this year. So what do you want to change, right? So if the processes of the organization, from procurement to media buying, are not flexible enough, you might have the truth in front of you, but you're not able to implement it, right? So the executive sponsor piece is very important, right? Make sure that the organization is ready, otherwise change things, and at the same time get an executive sponsor that empowers you to actually create change. Otherwise, you're a victim of your own success. You have something very beautiful on a shelf.
I have a question about walled gardens. You briefly mentioned it. I just want to learn more about how you're able to work with the walled gardens, or what data they do provide in order to factor that into this attribution model.
So it's ever-changing and complex, but so we can talk Facebook first. Facebook has a partnership where they have vendors that are allowed access to data. That data, it tends to be, for their MMM partnership, is impression level, it is by DMA, and you can get quite a lot of details. And that's global, so that's great. It feeds into mixed models. It does not work for attribution. They started an MTA partnership, which they're stopping, basically. And if there's anybody from Facebook, they can talk about it here. Or they're not really stopping it. They're reworking it or retuning it. But as I understand it, it's no longer going to deliver data at the person level. It still only dealt with click-through data, but it's no longer, I see nods, so I think that's right. No longer going to deliver data at the person level. It's going to be aggregated data to like maybe 1,000 people or something like that. So, but it's not yet begun. Right now, all the technology that's been built to get the data the way it exists today is going to need to be reworked, or the models as well, reworked and retuned based on the way the data is going to come for that MTA partnership. So that's a challenge, but certainly you can supplement through ad lift studies with Facebook, knowing that it is a siloed view, it is a Facebook-only view. You can supplement with mixed models and a more aggregate level data, and then this other piece of getting down to MTA is really in a bit of flux right now. Google, do you want to add anything to the Facebook?
No, I think that is kind of like it's still a game for dominance, right? So you're creating walled gardens to try to capture kind of like a largest share for advertising, right? I mean, I think that from kind of like an industry point of view is up to the buyers of that media to actually demand for more transparency and connectivity, because at the end of the day, not necessarily the data and the way that I'm going to engage my consumer is efficient using just one platform, right?
Hi. So I have a question around geolocation data to evaluate store visitation. There are many different ways companies can collect this data, coming from implementing an SDK inside of an app, using telcos, using beacons, or using a panel. What kind of questions do you ask these data providers on geolocation methods to validate that they are properly capturing true visitation, in terms of persistency and things like that? What kind of questions should we be asking to make sure that the data sources for this area are as accurate as possible?
Well, with all data, I think data assessment before you engage on any analytics is critical. And this is just one specific question you're asking, but it needs to be accurate, robust, comprehensive, and consistent over time, right? So those are just a couple of things that you want to ensure. But when it comes to the location providers, we're dealing in a space that's evolving right now. The best way to assess those is really to do a test across a number of vendors, which we've worked with our clients to do. And then once you're able to look across those number of vendors and the data that they're coming back with, how that compares if you're a retailer with maybe your store traffic, understanding where there may be holes in that data, a thorough data assessment, and we can maybe chat offline on some additional qualities behind that, but is absolutely critical, and it's the right question to ask. But in geolocation, it would be to look across vendors. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, another tack on that, probably not from the geolocation point of view of consumers, but there is another piece, if you think about Internet of Things, for example, of the kind of like the decreasing price in sensors and the better kind of like a duration of batteries, for example. So you can have actually sensors in specific goods, right? Think about pharmaceuticals, think about FMCG, right? That is extremely powerful, but I mean, to your point, is again actually testing that the capabilities of each of these vendors are against a set of information that you already know. So you partner with a specific retailer, for example, and you compare the information that those sensors give you to the information that you have to traditional means, right? The other application of geolocation, which is kind of different, is more, I don't know if it's geolocation, it's, for example, weather patterns and data or traffic, right? And that has a huge implication in the case of insurance. I mean, look at the cold weather right now, right? Now, what is going to happen right now in a lot of water heaters? They are going to freeze, right? And if they are going to freeze, there is a potential risk for flooding. What happens if you have a $5, $10 sensor in those water heaters and you get an early alert about that frozen problem? You're going to actually be preventing a huge damage that is going to cost thousands of dollars, right? So, I mean, the future is very bright from that point of view, because you can create warning signs that give you an idea of something that is going to happen and prevent it, and you can pay for those things, right? There are many applications, but I mean, the question is, again, is your company ready to actually harness that information, right? I mean, sometimes you get so much information that you don't act, right? And the second thing is obviously kind of like with all these kind of like privacy concerns, right? Do you have consumer consent? Are you using PII? If you're using PII, why you're using it, right? What is the value for the consumer? What type of the empowerment that you give to individual users about that information? Because it has to be a two-way street.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Key question to ask is not just the consumer, but what are you going to do with this data? And how is it going to help you make decisions better today that you can't make without this data?
Yeah, and maybe the other point is, I mean, since we're saying that the control of the information doesn't reside on one single company, how are you going to create a win-win equation across the distribution chain? Because at the end of the day, you only get collaboration and data sharing if there is value for the different players. And that's very important to make the system sustainable.
Hi.
This is a very basic question, but as someone who's kind of new to attribution, you spoke about the challenges of measuring something with a really long sales cycle, or if you're trying to upsell someone or renew them. For some of the softer touch points, like customer service, how do you measure that to begin with? Is that just surveys after someone has an interaction with someone? how does that kind of get into
I guess that is for me then. Yeah, okay, so yeah, on touch points, there are some basic indicators, like for example, Net Promoter Score, right? Net Promoter Score is a powerful indicator that tells you the intention of the person to recommend, and it's actually a good predictor of the intention of a customer to stay or to be an advocate even, right? So that's one option. You can do kind of like exit surveys. You can do kind of like some sort of kind of like also social and digital listening. I believe that you have to combine both, right? I mean, more and more with the techniques that we have, the idea of asking questions to consumers is not as relevant as before. It's better to be able to actually interpret the type of conversation that spontaneously people have. That's one thing. Now, there are other things that you can use. Right now, there are text analytics and natural language processing techniques that can tell you kind of like meaning, can give you meaning. There are artificial intelligence and different techniques that tell you what is the tonality of the voice. I can detect stress, right? Not necessarily what people tell you first is what matters, right? So if you can make those type of interpretations, you can realize that. Now you take all that information and what you do is you do different type of analytics. One thing that is common to do is, for example, driver analysis, right? So you end up understanding what is behind, which are the drivers of the scores that you get. And based on those drivers, you adjust things. You might be adjusting the language that you use. You might be adjusting the frequency of contact with your consumers, et cetera, et cetera. Again, beautiful kind of like rich data that you can mine and slice and dice.
Okay, kind of related to that question, while attribution is currently for kind of a short-term view,
Where are you?
do you see a future where attribution, the science behind attribution could be combined with other metrics to look at kind of lifetime customer value and the different impacts along the way, whether it's the short-term marketing initiatives, long-term branding, different touch points, et cetera?
Absolutely. That is, in my opinion, the end game. It's a huge challenge because you don't have that single view of the customer. But at the end of the day, customer lifetime value is what really matters. And I mean, every industry and every company should care about that. Easy? No, right? One typical challenge that you have is when you look at your customer base, right? Your all customer base have all these data gaps that make it impossible. So the way to start tackling the problem is, okay, accept that the past is imperfect, but start fixing actually that single view of the customer and data completeness for the new sales, right? So sooner or later, your customer base is going to start tilting toward data completeness. In industries that grow slow, it's going to be a painful process. But I mean, there are a lot of industries that have hyper growth right now, right? And that's why kind of like pure digital players have so much advantages, because most of the database already is born digital, shares information with you, and you have a lot of information for that. But yes, that's the future, and that's actually solving not a marketing problem, but a business problem, which is at the end of the day the end game.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate measure of long-term is to bring a customer in and to drive those customers that are going to have a strong lifetime value. And that really requires an understanding of your customer at a deeper level than some industries even have. Consumer goods have limited data. You know, certainly insurance has better data. First-party data, I think, was prediction that marketers are going to be even more excited to grow their first-party data assets. It's really to understand their customers and understand the value that they bring and how they can drive that value. So connecting kind of the vision of what of attribution was with more of a strategic view of your customer. That's not MTA today, but it is a longer term kind of customer lifetime, or I call it customer franchise value understanding.
Imagine even a future where, imagine that besides understanding individual customer lifetime value, you start understanding network dynamics. Imagine that you monetize the social graph, right? And now you understand, and this is something that kind of like intuitively makes sense. For example, when you're going to sell certain products, there is a network effect in a neighborhood. In emerging markets, this is very common in financial services, right? If you're able to kind of like find the opinion leader in a neighborhood, for example, and that person in Mexico, in Colombia, or in India is, for example, the person that owns the little mom and pop store, right? And you sell to that person is an opinion leader, right? So if you understand the kind of like the network effect of that, right? Imagine kind of like not having customer lifetime value, but also this idea of how things kind of like viralize, and how do you sell through a network. Probably somebody's figuring it out already, and I don't know about it, but I mean, it's something that excites me a lot.
One last call for questions before lunch.
Or lunch.
This one.
With the kind of more of the consulting aspect of analytics, I continually hear, I don't know, the question of how do you tell a story with the data? Like, how do you take something very technical and turn it into something very simple? So when you're starting to engage with, say, a new client who maybe doesn't know what kind of questions they need to answer, how do you help them define the business questions that they may be looking to answer with some of these data sets that you're presenting?
Well, I think ultimately you want to understand what the goals are for the business itself. Like, do they have growth objectives? Are they a retailer that, maybe is a big e-commerce retailer and they're opening up stores and they want to better understand their retail locations and how that's going to impact their business, and they have this growth aspiration of X% and they're spending more money behind advertising as a result, and we need to assess, is that working for us? So it's really a deeper understanding of their business objectives, because if you align the analytics to help them achieve their business objectives, then you're going to be in a win-win situation. But that's where I would start.
Yeah, start with the business problems, look at what are the levers of profitability, and one thing that helps us is kind of like bring analogs, right? I mean, you don't start from zero. Right. Good consulting and good vendors bring analogs from the industry or from other industries as examples. One thing that also helped me a lot at the beginning is try to kind of like ask what are the type of KPIs and the dashboards that the company uses. Yeah. That gives you a very clear idea of how far or how early in the journey they are. Because sometimes that actually is telling you that they're not ready, or that you need to challenge a lot of kind of like paradigms that they have already.
All right, well, thank you, Nancy and Carlos.